veterinary medicine. Dr. Annie Daniel is also one of my former students, so I think I'm in good company today. But it's a pleasure to be here to talk to you on the topic of building a diversity pipeline to veterinary medicine. Now, for the next few minutes, I would like for you to forget about what is happening on the national scene. Forget about what's happening on the world scene. And even here in New Orleans, forget about what you saw in the French quarters that night. However you engaged in the culture of New Orleans, just forget about that for a few minutes. I won't go you long. But I do have something to share with you on this very important topic about building a diversity pipeline to the veterinary medicine profession. First, let me begin by saying, in order to build a pipeline, you need education and a lot of resources. But you also need a roadmap or a blueprint to show you how to get there. So we have all of the ingredients to build this pipeline here in this room today. I believe that. I look out into the audience and I know who signed up for this conference. I believe we have all of the resources we need in this room to help build a pipeline, a diversity pipeline to the veterinary medicine profession. Thus, I am compelled this morning to ask you, are you willing to help build the diversity pipeline? All right? And that's for everybody. And particularly for the students who are here today. How many students do we have here today? Yeah, the majority of this audience. And for those of you who are not students, you are also needed to help build the pipeline so that you know you were once a part of the students yourselves. And perhaps you benefited from other people who help provide the resources to help build a pipeline for your education. So we need all of the resources here today, all of you here today, to help in building the diversity pipeline to veterinary medicine. I have a question for all of the students here today. Where do you want to be in the next 5 years? Think about that. And maybe you have already thought about it. Where do you want to be in the next 5 years? Would you like to be a practicing veterinary medicine professor? Or practicing a business? But think about that question. Also, I would like you to engage in a little mental exercise just for the next few seconds. And the first mental exercise is, how did I first learn about veterinary medicine? Second question is, how did I become interested in veterinary medicine? And the third question I would like for you to ponder is, what were my past experiences in veterinary medicine? Now, those three questions are very important. Why? Because I believe that your past experiences and your past exposures reflect your life course. Your past experiences and your past exposures reflect your life course. So if you answer, depending on how you answer those questions, that will help determine your life course. Now, I would like to share with you a little bit about my historical perspective. And I'm putting this into the veterinary medicine perspective. The first slide, segment there, is called the Fritz phenom. Now, Fritz was my pet dog when I was 10 years of age. Fritz was a large, white, shaggy dog who loved to play. He loved me, and I loved him. I had always wished to have a dog, and my father called me a dog. And I named him Fritz. So Fritz was my best friend. See, I was the first boy born in the family, and there were 5 girls before me. So I was the girls. I had only my sisters to play with, but I enjoyed Fritz to get away from all those girls. But that was during 1950 to 1960. I grew up in a small town in Mansfield, Louisiana, in the 1950s and 1960s. And Fritz was my best friend. But from there, I majored in animal science at Grambling State University. Well, before I go there, let me mention that there was no veterinarian in Mansfield. And one day, Fritz got shot. I was going to say injured because it made it a little harsh on you to know that a dog would get shot in the head. And he was shot in the head by our neighbor, Mr. Charlie Green. Can you imagine a neighbor shooting your dog in the head? And what made it worse was that there were no vets in the town of Mansfield that had only about maybe 800 population. No vets. Closest vet was 25 miles away in Shreveport, Louisiana. Anybody here from Shreveport? You know about Shreveport, Louisiana? Okay. One in the back. But anyway, we didn't have the resources to take our dog, Fritz, to the veterinarian in Shreveport. So guess who the veterinarian was? My dad. And my dad was a smart man, although he was not a vet. But he treated Fritz in the backyard. And it was a horrible ordeal to see that as a young boy, age 10, to see Fritz not only being shot, but then have to suffer the agony of having Daddy to pour some type of acid into his head or oil to keep the worms and flies and to heal the wound. So that was my first experience. And I had never heard about veterinary medicine. But I knew that Fritz needed a doctor. And my daddy was the veterinarian. because he treated Fritz. And Fritz went on to live until I got in college. And so Dad wasn't a good man. But I don't know if I'm a trouble with Dad with some of the issues that animals have today. And so I moved to the next slide. Animal science. I entered Grambling State University to major in animal science. And guess what? The animals on the farm, some of them got sick from time to time. We had cows, swine, poultry, all of the farm animals that you could name. And some of them would eventually get sick. There were no veterinarians at Grambling State University, none in the small town of Grambling, so they had to send to Ruston, Louisiana, to Louisiana Tech University to find a veterinarian to treat the animals, the sick animals at Grambling State University. And that was my next exposure to veterinary medicine. Fast forward, Jonathan. Now, Jonathan was not my son. He was our dog. And I had 3 boys, one of my sons here today, and they wanted a dog. And they named him Jonathan. I protested in that because I thought that Jonathan was a human name. And you should give an animal name. But they won. He just won out. And so we named him Jonathan. Well, that was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Jonathan got sick. No, like people, animals also would get sick. So we had to take him to the vet. And it was just before we were leaving to go on a summer vacation. Jonathan got sick. So we had to rush him to the vet, and I think we had to pay about $125. Well, that sounds familiar to you. So part of the family's vacation budget was to pay for Jonathan's health care. So yes, it can be costly. But if you don't have any vet in town, it's even more a daring experience. But fortunately, Baton Rouge has several vets. So we rushed into the vet and saved Jonathan for our kids. But guess what? There were no vets in Baton Rouge that looked like me. This was during the mid-70s. No vets who looked like me. Why that is important? Well, that's why we're here today, building the pipeline so we can diversify veterinary medicine. But during that time, there were no vets who looked like me. So we took him to an other race vet, which was fine, although we paid $125, but and Jonathan got well, and we continued with our vacation. But that's the Jonathan story in the 1980s. Okay, fast forward to the 1990s. That is when I became a professor of sociology at Louisiana State University. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later because I wrote a book about my experience. And it was at LSU where I met the first black veterinarian in my life. And his name was Alan Lee. And Alan Lee and I became good friends because I needed to learn something about, veterinary medicine. And I told him my story about Fritz, and I learned a great deal from him. and we had a long relationship. But I also met Dr. Walker. Dr. Percy Walker lives in a small town about 40 miles from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And he was the first practicing veterinarian that I had met in my life. He was a large animal specialist. He treated horses and cows on farms in the area. And he told me the ordeal about his profession in veterinary medicine. But he also told me there were only 2 black vets that he knew of in the whole of Louisiana. Can you imagine that? 4.5 million people. 2 practicing vets that he knew of in Louisiana. Then Dr. Raby, Dr. Clyde Raby started a veterinary medicine practice in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And he practiced for about 30 years. The only African American in Baton Rouge. So again, we were talking about building the diversity pipeline. All right? So let's begin with the problem. Now, yes, I'm kind of old-fashioned. I begin with the problem. Some people may call it the challenge, but it can be that too. Well, here's the problem. The number of black students being admitted to veterinary medicine schools remains low. In fact, it's around 3.6%. But it only recently attained that level because for decades it was less than 2%. The number of black people entering the profession have remained around 2% for decades. So reaching parity within the profession would take decades, and this is a quote by Antonio Craig, a doctor of ABMA. Right. So that's the problem, and I don't think anybody can argue that this is not a problem. But the question is, why is there such a low representation of black vets in America? Well, we need to research that as well. Another part of the problem deals with the lack of educational institutions that enroll blacks in veterinary medicine. And I don't know if you're able to see the slide or not. Yes, you can see it. Well, if you notice, all of the bar graphs are kind of leaning towards the left, which just means that they are not highly representative. The institution with the largest representation is Tuskegee University, an HBCU, and you would expect, of course, it would have the most vets because it is an HBCU. And I think, by the way, I'm a graduate of Tuskegee University. I did my master's degree there. That was before I went to Grambling State University. But apparently Tuskegee is turning out a lot of black veterinarians, and that's good. And also, if you look at the top of the chart, UGA, that's the University of Georgia, they had 84 students enrolled in veterinary medicine program under that year. Now, something is going on at the University of Georgia that we need to find out about. Apparently, they're doing something good in Georgia that only Louisiana, because we need some of that same magic to happen in Louisiana. Well, LSU, you can see where we stand. By the way, I'm an LSU Tiger too. Worked there 30 years, and you see LSU. We're doing better. We're doing better. But at this moment, we still don't have any black veterinary medicine professors at LSU. We have some foreign countries, but we don't have any African American. But the student population enrollment is increasing. And that provides a challenge, which we will see later, concerning the environmental quality for people of color at predominantly white institutions. And I can tell you a lot about that because I wrote this book about my 36 years of experience at LSU, which I talk more about here. Okay, so part of the problem is the lack of representation in the enrollment at the schools that have veterinary medicine programs. And most of these are predominantly white institutions, and so that's a part of the problem. And the enrollment has percentage of the total enrollment of students in veterinary medicine has been about, I think I said 3.6% of the total enrollment, and that's low. That's low. And the way we determine that is that if African Americans represent 13% of the total U.S. population, and we expect the enrollment in any particular education area to approach that percentage. Okay, this second part of the problem. Second part of the problem really kind of bears out what I've already stated, but this time we're looking at occupations. Because after you're educated, you want to go into some profession, to help earn a living. Well, you can see the statistics here. And by the way, you can look at the gender statistics too. And when I looked at this slide, I wondered, why is veterinary medicine predominantly female? Maybe some of you can answer that question. Why is it that females tend to select veterinary medicine more than males, at least in the percentages? But when you look at the black or African Americans, you also see that the percentages are very low. Especially in the practice in veterinary, which is 2.2%, and those in veterinary technologists and technicians, 1.1%, but veterinarian assistants and laboratory caretakers, 12.4%. So for the blacks who are going into veterinary medicine, they're more likely to be an assistant than to be a practicing veterinarian. And I think that is troubling across the occupational spectrum. So, yes, part of the problem is getting them enrolled in universities so they can get degrees to practice their profession. But then after that, the problem is getting them into a marketable veterinary medicine profession so they can earn a living for themselves and their families. Now we have the Asian and Hispanic representation here too, and you can see how they compare with the African Americans. And if you have some questions about that, you just hold them for our Q&A session. Well, I know you're tired of talking about the problem, so finally we got to the solution. Well, our own Dr. Eddie Daniels, who was the founder of this association, this organization, NABV, I quote, she said, "We must build a pipeline, a pathway to diversity in the veterinary medicine profession." A second quote by Mark Field in the Veterinary Advantage publication said that diversity in the veterinary medicine workforce starts with great school children, and it advances on up the chain all the way through graduation from the veterinary school of medicine. Now, what both of these scholars are saying is that we need to build a diversity pipeline in veterinary medicine. All right? I mean, this is what I conclude with this. So if the solution is to build a pipeline, the question is, how do we build it? Well, this is kind of a flow diagram of the veterinary medicine diversity pipeline based on major educational categories. If we need to start in elementary school, I would ask you this question if you think about it. How do we introduce elementary school children to veterinary medicine? That's a challenge for you. If we just start very early, which I agree with, what is the approach that we should use? Do we bring little toys, animal toys into the classroom and teach them? A lot of them have pets already, so they bring a pet in and give a demonstration. But we have to use our innovative and creative minds to devise strategies to introduce elementary school children to veterinary medicine. And a good way to do that is like, well, not Fritz, because my dad was there, but like Jonathan. You know, our boys saw the experience of taking their pet to a veterinarian in Baton Rouge. And they learned at an early age what a veterinarian did, because we taught them. But then what about middle school? How do you introduce middle school children to veterinary medicine? And then, of course, as you progress to high school, college, and beyond, and into the workforce, you see this strategy continues. So what we need to do is to work out develop a plan for how to teach and expose children and people at these different levels to veterinary medicine practice. Okay? And I think there are people who are working on this as I speak. Now, if you think that building a pipeline is difficult, well, you're right. It is not easy. It takes work. And therefore, you need a plan. And as you educators know, you have to do strategic planning. So what should strategic planning look like? Well, I just provided a little flow diagram, and you can fill in the blanks. This was actually a slide that I did for Louisiana State University, and at the time they had 10 African American veterinary medicine students out of a larger population. I don't remember the exact number. But anyway, you have to fill in the block here about recruitment. What kinds of innovative strategies are needed in order to recruit people of color into the veterinary medicine profession? Now, you have to put your creative mind to work here. They are out there. They can be recruited. They can be educated about what veterinary medicine is. And it's your job, our job, to find them and recruit them. And use some creative strategies and so on and so forth. I call it outreach. Then admission. Getting in. How do we encourage them to apply so they have the opportunity, a chance of getting in? And then once they get in, we have the challenge of retention. I call it staying in. And then if they stay in, how do we develop an environment that is conducive for their not only progression to the next level, but also to the final stage of graduation? I call getting out. Yes. And it reminds me of this little commercial about, it was a roast commercial. That they check in, but they don't check out. Well, we're dealing with people now. And when they check in, or get admitted, and when they have to go through the environment that they're in, and when they reach graduation and check out, so they can become a practicing veterinarian. This is the aim. So I think that what we need is strategic planning for diversity in veterinary medicine. And I offer you this 5-year model. And if you want me to fill in these blanks, I'll leave my telephone number here. You can hire me. I'll do that. If you want to take the cheap way, I'll get the green number. Okay, diversity and inclusion flow model. Now this is just a general model that shows how you get from point A to point B, and emphasizing the kind of direction of flow that we expect. So recruitment and admission and environment and involvement are the basic components where we began on the left side of the equation. And I don't care if you are in an institution, grade school, or even in the profession itself, we have to be concerned with all of these items on the left side of the equation. And retention in the middle, and then of course graduation at the end. Now here's where the tough work begins. Developing the model for diversity and inclusion. And I call it a Durant model because I developed it. I did research to come up with, I call it evidence-based practices that work. Because if you go back to the diversity and inclusion model, there are questions about how you obtain a high level of productivity in each one of these categories. Well, I offer some suggestions. Now, if some of these suggestions look familiar, they are, because we all know about them. However, the innovative and creative strategy that you use for these can vary widely. And so we have to use our creative skills and abilities to figure out how to utilize these practices in your university, in your environment, or in your profession where you are. For example, there are probably 101 different ways to give out a scholarship. I mean, it works. It works. And I know all of you know this because you have been the beneficiary of a scholarship and you know how they work. But the scholarship must be competitive for reducing the cost of a degree program for individuals who may come from low-income families or moderate-income families. Okay, next, mentorship. Now, mentorship has been around for a long time, for generations. But the new thing about mentorship is that you have to create this strategy that can help make it work. We have graduate students being used as mentors at LSU. How many of you have been mentored, if you're undergraduate, by a graduate student? What about a professor? Yes, okay, very good. Because that's the basic model for education in general. I mean, you can read, study, and all like that, but mentorship is a basic humanistic model for the advancement of civilization and education. Then summer break. We have a summer break program at LSU. And guess who paid for it? The football team, the athletic department. You know, we have a very successful athletic program at LSU. Women that won the national championship. So they on the time now. They asked for some of the money to help the women's study program at LSU. And that's the way it should be. The women are producing the championships, so why shouldn't some of the money be diverted to the women's study program? I know you told me that y'all are working on getting the women's study program at Howard University, so good luck on that. But it is something that works. And by the way, graduation rate for the students enrolled in the summer break program was 95% the first year. Amazing. Compared to less than 50% for the rest of the students. Minority faculty. This is an area that has been debated, but I believe that if you have a higher percentage of minority faculty and they are trained with knowledge about how to advance careers or education for minority students, I think it can be a tremendous boost to your programs. So I am an advocate for that. I was one of the first 6 professors hired at Louisiana State University. And I demanded that we increase the minority faculty at LSU. And one of my little stump speeches was that if we can have 80% of the football players that were African American, why can't we have at least 50% or at least, 10% of the students be African American? I didn't get no applause on that. but if the football team and the basketball team and the track team can be 75% plus African American, the student body at least could be 10% African American. So we're working on that. Recruitment. Hiring a recruiter who has an intended goal of increasing the black faculty. And it took us 20 years to convince the administration that we should do that. But finally, they bought the idea. In around 1990, we got our first diversity officer at Louisiana State University. Support groups. Now support groups was an innovation that students made. Students developed their own support group. But when we saw what they were doing, we enhanced it and added our support, faculty support, staff support, and administrative support. Now, we did that at LSU, and the numbers began to increase in terms of not only enrollment, but graduation as well. The institutional linkages, and I want to put an exclamation mark here because I think this is one approach that we should use going forward. I remember the slide that showed Tuskegee and being one of the leading institutions in veterinary medicine training. Well, how can we increase the number of HBCUs who follow this type of lead? I think institutional linkages is one way to do that. For example, Southern University and Louisiana State University now have signed sort of a memorandum of understanding. Now they have to get the memorandum of agreement and then have to make it work. And they're going to collaborate on how to increase the number of veterinary medicine students and also students in areas in agriculture at Southern University. So you have to put your energies and your minds and your support together in order to do that. Then multimedia advertising, we find that works. Now that we are in the era of multimedia advertising, it's all over the place. I think we can capitalize on that by using our technology to promote programs to students anywhere and bring them into the arena of where we are so that we can help with their advancement as well. Direct visits, don't underestimate that. They are still important. It's nothing like visiting someone, looking them in the eyes, shaking their hand, and telling them, I want you to come to my school. And I know that we live in the age of technology, and now we communicate through technology. But direct visits do work, and they still work, I should say that. Referrals and alumni, very, very important. But you have to first graduate some so they can go out and tell the story.